Hello and how you doing, folks? Yours truly, Randy Rand here for another version of RandyRand.com. Today we spoke with Dr. Angelique Walker Smith, and she is a senior associate for the National African American Church Engagement for the organization Bread for the World. And today we talked about global poverty and inequality. This discussion is a part of my uh, documentary series, Poverty, Racism, and Income Inequality in Black America. How do we move forward? We talked about the family unit in black communities and how they've been decimated. And, you know, we discussed some of the reasons why this has been the case and has become the case. And also talked about the root causes of income inequality. Uh, We also talked about educating African Americans about uh, the effect of globalism and how it may affect them. The sister is very, very knowledgeable, and you can tell by uh, her conversation that she's very well traveled and has done some work there also at the United Nations there in New York City, and has addressed poverty. Um, and as well as income inequality on a global basis, as she was about to take off for I think somewhere in Africa um, after this interview. So you certainly want to hear what she has to say, as she's very well versed in the poverty issue as well as income inequality as well as racism, and she speaks a great deal about it. Also, from a historical point of view, uh, she's a very good interview, and I implore you to check it out. Check it out. This is yours truly, Randy Rand, and thank you for the time. Okay, and we're back. Yours truly, Randy Rand here for another version of RandyRand.com, and today we're speaking with Dr. Angelique Walker Smith, and she's the associate for National African American Church Engagement for the organization Bread for the World. We're going to be discussing global poverty and inequality, which is a part of my discussion documentary entitled Poverty, Race, and Income Inequality in Black America. How do we move forward? Welcome to the show, Dr. Smith.
Thank you very much.
And we're going to get right to it and do it. And I want to ask you, how can we successfully educate African Americans about the importance of them understanding globalism and how it can positively or negatively affect them?
First and foremost, we need a revamping of our whole education curriculum for public education, private and parochial education, and not just for people of African descent, but for all people. The narrative in our education system is flawed at best relative to communicating the history of the narrative of people of African descent. We need major reforms in our curriculum. That's the first point. The second point is, in addition to the mainstreaming, if you will, of educational curriculum within our public, private, and parochial schools, we need supplemental education and enrichment for all of our children and adults so that they can particularly internalize both the pain and the celebration of our particular struggle, which is a global struggle, the Pan African understanding of our experience and therefore the experience of all people. So I wouldn't want to exclude these opportunities to any population. We need reforms of the narrative.
In your statement you made at MLK Global, you mentioned that we need the quote unquote global will of public policies to lead us forward. Please explain what you meant by that.
So the good news is that the nations of the world, through the United Nations, have said the Sustainable Development Goals are critical to the future of all of us on the planet. That's the very good news. The Sustainable Development Goals outline 17 goals that help us to get where we need to be, to end hunger, to end poverty, and most importantly, to engage a sustainable future for all of us. These goals have objectives. They also have deliverables that are to be accomplished by the year 2030. Therefore, we have a roadmap and we have consensus of the nations of the world to do that. The problem is that all the nations have their own internal sovereignty. All of the nations of the world have their own congressional or, if you will, parliamentary governments that implement or choose not to implement the goals that have been adopted at the global table. This is where the people on the ground and the people who elect our officials have to ensure that we have representation to follow the directives that are possible for all of us to benefit a sustainable world going forward. So we need the populace and we need the leadership at the structural levels to do what it is we've said we would do to reach our goals. This is why we have the Sustainable Development Goals now, because we now understand from the learnings of the accomplishments of the Millennial Development Goals that we can do this when governments and the populace buy into the goals and objectives that have been brought from all the different governments to say this is where we need to be. That said, the people, the populace, has to hold our leaders accountable. That's why elections matter, and that's why grassroots movements matter.
How would you measure the efforts by the people holding these governments, especially here in the United States? How would you measure their effectiveness in holding their governments accountable?
Well, I think that the accountability is seen when we decide to elect persons who embody the principles of what it means to have a sustainable future. So communities know, well, first of all, we know the data. The data already tells you what the indicators are of poverty and hunger in our communities. That data is available, is public, is free. When we start to see leadership that addresses directly that data and begins to address solutions, not just the observations of problems, but the solutions in their own communities. You see, the elections have to happen both at the local level, the state, and of course the national and then the global levels. But we must begin with local accountability. So accountability begins at home. And we have the data to show where the gaps are. And we also have people in our local communities who understand what that means. So we have to build coalitions at the local levels and the regional levels to make sure that all are at the table. The parochial tables are helpful for strengthening those particular parochial voices. But we must have larger tables where those voices are convened, where we have those who are doing the data, those who understand their communities, who have innovative solutions coming out of their most affected status. Those folks must be at the same table. If you do not have leaders who are helping to facilitate that, then you leave voices behind, and that's when you have problems. We've got to do a better job of that. And so the leadership that is elected must be held accountable for being able to have those kinds of direct relationships with all of the voices from the local level. And then it builds out from there.
The family unit in black communities has been decimated. There are many reasons why this is the case. But in your opinion, what are some of the main reasons why this is the case?
We cannot get away from 244 years of slavery, of enslavement, not slavery, but enslavement. We cannot get away from that narrative. It is real, and it still persists in its awful relics. We cannot get away from over about 150 years of Jim Crow laws. We cannot get beyond, we cannot we cannot negate only 50 years, really, that we can talk about, which is a post-Jim Crow period and enslavement period. We cannot. So basically, this 50th marker of the martyrdom of Dr. King, this 50-year marker of the Poor People's Campaign, is a very important marker, not just because of those two events, but it is a real point of saying transition into more people into the people of African descent into the middle class, and even very, very few, and still, even today, although it's touted differently, a very small percentage of the upper middle class of people of African descent. If that is true, if we're saying 300 to 400 years of basically being in a caste system that has put forth policies, systematic policies, that have prevented the empowerment of immigrant communities from the continent who were brought here against their will and then put into captivity in terms of policies here, that we are in the situation that we are in. We must recognize that the decision makers in our states and in our country and in our world have helped to get us where we are, which is not a very promising situation in the past. Now, that said, people of African descent have resisted. And the narrative that we have not is a flawed narrative. People of African descent have resisted from day one, even on the continent of Africa before the transatlantic happened. We have resisted. It's been our faith, and it's been our tenacity, and it's been our gift of sacrifice that our ancestors saw that their children would have something better than what they experienced. So for me, policies, the economic caste system that came with the policies had put us primarily in the place that we are now. But I really think it's important to say people of African descent have been resisting and have been surviving and even thriving despite that narrative.
In your opinion, what are some of the root causes of income inequality?
When you enslave a people for 244 years, when you have non-citizenship, when you have people who are not able to own property, who are not able to own land, who are not able to vote, and you have Jim Crow laws that follow that. Meanwhile, you gift the rest of the population that is not of African descent. You give them homesteading. You give them empowerment resources or policies that help them to be rewarded for the land and the resources that are available to them in this, quote, new Americas. When you have this huge chasm of dichotomization, then you understand why it is that we have economic disparities. This is the case globally. This isn't just the case nationally. I'm speaking particularly to the communities of African descent, but globally, when you even move beyond that, you have the same principles of colonialism and imperialism that have got us to this point.
Yes.
Well, that's with intentionality. That's by design. That doesn't just happen. So we have got to figure out, for the benefit of the planet, for the benefit of all of God's children, how do we have an economy that is for all of the people, where all of the people thrive, not just a percentage.
We are speaking to Dr. Angelique Walker Smith. She's the Associate for National African American Church Engagement for the organization Bread for the World. We're speaking about global poverty and inequality, which is a part of my documentary series, Poverty, Race, and Income Inequality in Black America. How do we move forward? And Dr. Smith is kind enough to give us some of her very valuable time today. Dr. Smith, I once heard it said that, quote unquote, poverty is a violent act. What's your opinion about poverty?
Well, of course, it's a violent act. And why is it a violent act? When you don't have resources to provide for your families, that leads you to other choices where you may not have as a priority the interests of the communities. You have an interest in feeding your family. So what happens is we have conflicts, right? A lot of our conflicts in the world are because of economic instability and food insecurity. You can see this time and time again in many of the conflicts we see around the world. Bread for the World had a wonderful report that came out on fragility last year that talks about the push factors. One of the push factors around food insecurity and hunger and poverty is conflict and having lack of opportunities to be able to feed oneself and feed your families and to have dignified work. So there is a direct correlation to not having what it is we need in order to survive and then also to thrive. And humans being able to say, well, we've got to figure out how we do this. It leads to competition, it leads to conflict, leads to different problems that we would rather not have. I mean, just dream of a world where everyone has what everyone needs. Because I'm clear, I think people of faith are clear. I think the data shows that there is enough. There really is enough.
Sure.
But we don't have the will to ensure that everyone has their fair share. So we have conflict.
As you were just speaking about conflict and, uh, the need for food, the need for uh, opportunities and, to not only make a living, but to, make money or what have you. Uh, a lot of times, I think what happens in this country is when we hear about those issues, uh, we think of third world nations or countries that are, poor and just really don't have any kind of opportunities or what. But when I look at what's happening in this country, I don't see too much of a difference with regards for the need of opportunities and money and food security and so forth and so on. I don't see people in this country being too far away from that. What do you think about that?
So the bad news is 43 million in the United States suffer from hunger and poverty. Now this is just a regular data point.
Mm-hmm.
43 million. That's been documented. We already know that there's food insecurity in about 43 million persons' lives in the United States. This is why we have to have programs that empower people to be able to eat and be able to provide themselves with empowerment opportunities. I refuse to accept this term safety net. It's not about safety net. It's about empowerment for people to be able to lift themselves up from the challenges of hunger and challenges of poverty. It's been proven that these programs, historically called safety net programs, now I would say empowerment programs, have moved people from poverty and hunger to be able to work and provide for themselves. The data shows that. So if we don't have those kinds of programs in place, we have disempowered the possibility of moving people from where they are to where they could be. So unfortunately, your observation is true. Now, the other point that we need to make is we are showing, quote, full employment in the United States. The problem is that people are working 2 and 3 jobs and the benefit of empowerment programs just to make ends meet. So we do not have a sufficient living wage for many of our folks. We do not have sufficient benefits for people to have health care and dental care and other benefits that the middle class takes for granted at the levels in which we do see people thriving. So we've got to do a better job of being able to put in place policies and resources to get people to get to the points that we need them to be. So unfortunately, we do have the same challenges in our global community and our domestic context. Moreover, we have friends who are coming to be a part of our society or contributing to our society. We have those coming from south of the border. We have immigrant populations coming here who have historically been welcomed in this country. And unfortunately, we penalize some of the access of resources that have historically, this is very important, have historically been able to benefit from the hospitality of this country. I am very sorry to say I believe race and I think ethnicity and these other kinds of unfortunate lenses have prevented us from being as hospitable as we ought to be. So what does it do? It causes another underclass to be developed in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that, we hurt ourselves. I am very pained today to know that mothers and fathers are being separated from their children at the
Absolutely.
border.
Yep.
Right now, this moment you and I are speaking, there is a child being separated from his mother and his father. We criminalize people who want to come and contribute, who are fleeing from the horrors of their countries. And we, as the United States, have said, "Bring us your poor, bring us those who have been suffering." This nation was principles, and we tried to maintain those principles up until we started seeing more diversity. Well, this is a problem. It defies our U.S. values. It deprives our values of faith, and it is shameful, absolutely shameful. All of this contributes to the underclass. So we make choices and policies, and we choose to implement policies in ways that are punitive, and I even want to say torturous. When you separate parents from their children, that is torture. That is not just painful. That is just totally a horrific, unacceptable situation. And that's what we do. We create the underclass. We create the poor because we don't find ways to be hospitable to all of God's children. And shame on us.
And to your point, I indeed agree. Shame on us, but I'm not surprised. And when looking at the history of this country, with separating the children from their parents, well, this country's done that before.
Well, that's exactly right.
You know.
That's why we cannot dismiss 244 years of enslavement and 150 years of Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
Nor can we ignore those who came over who were indentured, who were not necessarily of African descent, but from other ethnicities as well.
Yes.
Or our Native American friends who were disempowered by their lands being taken. We cannot. There are consequences to our behavior. This is a narrative that does not work for us, but works against all of us.
We're speaking to Dr. Angelique Walker Smith. She's the Associate for National African American Church Engagement for the organization Bread for the World, and we're discussing global poverty and inequality, which is a part of my documentary series, Poverty, Race, and Income Inequality in Black America. How do we move forward? And Dr. Smith has been so kind to give us some of her very valuable time today. Dr. Smith, in your opinion, and I'm asking as a human being, how do policies such as slavery, Reconstruction, the Black Codes, Jim Crow legislation, the Three-Fifths Compromise, redlining, stop and frisk, etc., gain legitimacy in the rule of law as well as the laws of the land?
Well, this goes back to who was elected. So the major piece of disempowerment of people of African descent relative to those policies were not people who were able to vote in their own interests, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of being enslaved and part of Jim Crow, which is why people were lynched and horrible things were done even after the enslavement period, because when you vote, you actually determine your leadership, right?
Yes.
So that was one of the major disempowerment ploys about being enslaved in the Jim Crow laws, was you were not able to choose your leadership. So when you put leadership that is voted by people who don't have those most affected by some of these challenges, this is the result you get. You get people who bring their lens, who elect their own people and elect their own privilege and their own sense of agency, but not the agency and empowerment of all the people. Because we know, unfortunately, there was only a remnant of those who were not of African descent who were sympathetic to that cause. We did have abolitionists. We did have people of faith who stood up with us. That has always been the case. They have been there, but they've been a minority voice. They have not been the majority voice of those who have elected the officials. This is why it is so critically important that everyone, including people of African descent, exercise their rights. Because if you don't vote, if you don't participate in the political process, be clear, someone else is acting in your interest. And it may not be in your interest.
Yep.
You know, so we can choose to be apolitical, we can choose to do all those things, but there's a price. There's a serious price. You get leaders who do not act in your communities with your community's priorities. So we have simply got to do a better job at the local levels of organizing who it is we think represent the interests of all of the people. That's where coalitions come into play. That is where we should have processes and strategies for full engagement.
It's been said many times that black Americans should put their money in black banks. How real is this suggestion as a solution?
Well, I think the good news is that before integration, we were actually the data and the history shows we were actually very successful with that strategy. um, Even against the Jim Crow laws and all the rest that were happening at the time. We were forced actually during segregation to bring our resources together and to implement economic zones and all of that. I mean, you can go to any number of communities around the country, and if you look before, the mid '60s thereabouts, you can see where there was actual success about that. Um, I am of the mind that we need to have a Pan African entrepreneurial spirit. What I mean by that is, happily, the independence movement on the continent of Africa, the independence movement south of the border, in the Caribbean, and in parts of Latin America, have had some success with entrepreneurial projects, banks, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it's not where it could be because of colonialism and all the other things we know were part of that narrative. I think people of African descent have got to cut across our diversities and find new ways to partner with each other. I think the African Union is giving us some leadership about that. So what I'm saying is I think we need to have a global Pan African strategy around wealth creation, entrepreneurship, and those kinds of things. We're in a global economy, and we do have people of African descent and of African identity who do have resources that they didn't have before. So we need a new approach. I think we need a renewed approach to a Pan African vision, as we did with the Manchester meetings in the early 1900s that led to the independence movements throughout the continent of Africa in the 50s and the 60s and going forward. We need that kind of summit. We need that kind of mobilization. I think as I said, I think the African Union is giving us some leadership on that. I see some possibilities there to have that conversations. I'm pleased to be a part of some of those conversations. So I don't think it should just be a U.S. based strategy. I think it has to be a Pan African strategy.
We have been speaking with Dr. Angelique Walker Smith. She's the Associate for National African American Church Engagement for the organization Bread for the World. And we were discussing global poverty and inequality, which is a part of my documentary series, Poverty, Race, and Income Inequality in Black America. How do we move forward? And Dr. Smith was so gracious as to give us some of her very valuable time today. And in closing, Dr. Smith, we thank you for talking with us this morning. And in closing, please feel free to plug any projects that you are involved in.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. I am the senior associate for Pan African Church Engagement, and so I have the great privilege of working at Bread for the World to further these issues around economic empowerment, hunger, and poverty issues. This is a great privilege. Everyone doesn't get the opportunity to be able to do this kind of work full time, and I am very privileged to have that. So I just really give thanks to God for my opportunity. I do think that it's very important that listeners understand that policy matters, economic vision matters. We must also have the racial equity lens in all of our work, but we cannot leave it there. We have to make sure it's included with how we understand policies and how it is we envision our local communities. I think we have opportunities out here to engage the sustainable development goals. The good news is we really don't have to create that anymore. That's been done. So let's go to the places where that has been done. Let's go to the places where the deep thinking with deep capacity has presented scenarios to us to say, what does this mean for my local communities? And most of all, I just want to encourage people to be of good faith. I just thank God for my ancestors who envisioned that I would be here today, despite all the horror of the days past. We are so blessed, and we owe those ancestors. Faithfulness, and I just feel that passionately. And I just feel my faith is helping to sustain us to get this done.